Today, we are doing a deep dive on an incident that really just spiraled from a local tragedy into a full-blown federal state crisis. We're talking about the fatal shooting of 37-year-old activist Renee Nicole Good by a U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agent, an ICE agent in Minneapolis.
And this happened on January 7th, 2026. So, the year had barely started.
Right.
And what's so critical to understand here is that this is so much more than just a case of conflicting reports. This entire thing, from the second that shot was fired, became this high-stakes case study in how government trust can just completely collapse.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Our mission today is to really give you, the learner, a clear picture of all the layers. First, we're dissecting two, radically different stories about what happened.
Was it an activist attacking a federal officer, or was it a terrified mother shot while trying to flee?
Exactly. And then we're going to get into the real core of this, the unprecedented battle over who even gets to investigate the killing.
And that's the fascinating part, because this shooting immediately kicked off protests, not just in Minneapolis, but all across the country. And it really just exposed this profound rift in how the federal government sees its own enforcement power versus any kind of local oversight.
So let's start with the encounter itself. The baseline facts, if you will, from the video that's been circulating.
Yeah, it's a very short, very compressed timeline.
It shows ICE agents approaching Good's stopped SUV. An agent is trying to get the driver's side door open.
And then the vehicle starts to move. It attempts to drive off.
And that's the key moment. A second agent, who's positioned in front of the car, fires multiple shots, close range. The car then speeds up and crashes just moments later.
And from that one brief sequence, you get two completely opposed narratives. On one side, you have the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, which oversees IC.
And they came out with a narrative of self-defense, of violent obstruction.
It was incredibly aggressive language. DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, she went on record saying Good tried to, and I'm quoting, weaponize her vehicle. She even called it an act of domestic terrorism. And then asserted the agent acted according to his training.
Domestic terrorism. That is an unbelievably strong claim for what is, on its face, an officer-involved shooting.
It is. And the federal justification for that term comes from their claim that Good had followed these agents to two other locations before this, and that she was actively using her car to block the road.
So they're painting a picture of a premeditated, dangerous act of interference.
Exactly. That this wasn't random. It was a deliberate attempt to obstruct federal officers.
But then you have the local story, the community narrative, which just completely rejects that.
Completely.
Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey flat out called the federal version a false narrative. He said it was clear from the video that she was just trying to leave the scene, not attack anyone.
And the emotional weight of that narrative really comes from her family. Her mother, Donna Ganger, she told reporters her daughter was probably terrified.
Which paints a totally different picture, right? Her driving forward wasn't an attack, it was a panic response, an attempt to escape.
That's the counter-narrative. And the community view really reinforces that. A local mother named Lisa was quoted saying Good was a warrior who died doing what was right.
So terrorist versus warrior, that's the disconnect. Which really brings us to the next question. Who was Renee Nicole Good? What was she doing there?
Well, she was a mother of three, a poet, a guitarist. People who knew her described her as compassionate, loving. But critically, for this story, she was a Minneapolis-based immigration activist.
And a member of a group called IC Watch.
That's right, a very dedicated member.
So tell us about IC Watch. What is their goal?
The group's stated goal is to monitor, track, and sometimes interfere with or oppose federal immigration enforcement. They're most active in so-called sanctuary cities, where local and federal cooperation on immigration is already limited.
And this is another one of those points where the definitions just clash completely.
They absolutely do. The group members call themselves legal observers, basically a constitutional check on federal power.
But the feds see it differently.
Very differently. Federal sources label them organized obstructionists. And they cite a history of incidents, not just in Minneapolis, where they claim people from similar groups have used cars to block or even strike at officers during raids.
So the federal investigation isn't just about the shooting itself, it's about the group.
That's a huge part of it. They're reportedly looking into the training and funding for these IC Watch groups, basically treating them as a coordinated effort to undermine federal law enforcement.
And you can see how that context, that view, would fuel the immediate fallout.
Oh, it was like throwing gasoline on a fire. The day after, protests calling to abolish ICE were happening in Houston, Philadelphia, D.C.
And the geography of it in Minneapolis is it's so potent. The tributes, the flowers were being laid just blocks from where George Floyd was killed in 2020.
You can't separate this from that history. In that city, the stakes for transparency and police accountability are already sky high.
Right. And you mentioned this wasn't happening in a vacuum. There was a similar incident in Portland around the same time.
Yeah, Border Patrol agents wounded 2 people. And you had the same pattern. DHS and the local Democratic mayor with completely conflicting stories. It's a national pattern of federal-local tension.
And that tension brings us to the absolute core of this deep dive, the fight over jurisdiction. This is where a tragic shooting becomes a legal and political crisis.
And it all centers on one agency, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, the BCA.
So the BCA is basically the state's top investigative body for major crimes, especially officer-involved killings, right?
Exactly. They handle the big, sensitive cases, and initially everything was proceeding as you'd expect.
There was an agreement for a joint investigation. BCA, FBI, local prosecutors, everyone was supposed to be at the table.
Which is standard procedure. It's how you ensure impartiality and share evidence properly.
But then
federal authorities just reversed course. Abruptly. The FBI blocked the BCA from participating.
Blocked him how?
Completely. Denied access to all materials, all reports, all physical evidence related to the shooting. A total blackout.
And the political response was instant. Minnesota's Governor Tim Walz, a Democrat, accused the Trump administration of intentionally blocking the state.
And on the other side, Vice President J.D. Vance maintained it was solely a federal issue. Secretary Noem went even further, saying Minnesota authorities don't have any jurisdiction in this investigation.
So we have to ask why? Why the block? This is not normal.
It's highly unusual. And the sources all point to one thing: profound mutual distrust.
Okay, let's break that down. What was the federal concern?
Agent safety angle, right?
Right. Administration sources were saying they couldn't trust state officials with sensitive information. They were afraid the agents involved would be doxxed, that their safety would be compromised.
Because state officials had been publicly critical of IC, calling them reckless.
Exactly. The feeling from the federal side was that the state was already hostile and had picked a side, that they couldn't be impartial. And then on the flip side, the state had the exact same concern about the feds.
The exact same fear, just in reverse. The impartiality angle. State officials were looking at these public statements from the highest levels of the federal government and saying, how can you possibly conduct a fair investigation?
That's a key point. You have the vice president saying it was a tragedy of her own making, and Secretary Noem had already labeled her a domestic terrorist.
Before any state-level investigation had even begun.
So the state's view was that the outcome of the federal probe was already decided, that it was purely political.
A foregone conclusion. And this complete breakdown of faith led to a total dead end for the state.
Yeah.
The BCA officially announced they had reluctantly withdrawn.
Because they couldn't proceed. They had no evidence, no materials.
They were completely frozen out. And the practical consequences of that are just huge.
The state's public safety commissioner, Bob Jacobson, he basically said bringing a case against the agent would be extremely difficult, if not impossible.
Of course. How do you prosecute when the other side holds all the cards? The ballistics, the witness statements, everything.
And this just obliterates public trust, doesn't it? Minnesota's Attorney General Keith Ellison, he worried that no matter what the federal investigation finds, the public is going to question it.
He said, whatever they come out with, it would be questioned. And he's right. You have experts like criminology professor Edward McGuire saying this kind of exclusion is designed to undermine public trust.
He suggested these moves aren't really about the law, but are political efforts to control the investigation and shape its outcome.
And that political shaping is still happening. We have Mayor Frey in Minneapolis saying he's worried the administration is going to use this chaos to occupy the city.
Referencing reports that 100 more federal agents are being deployed there.
Which was then met with a counter-move from the governor, who activated the National Guard.
So it's not just a legal battle anymore. It's a physical struggle for control of the city.
It is. We went from one tragic split-second encounter to a full-blown political crisis, where the question of who investigates is the main weapon. It's a total breakdown.
So to sum up this deep dive, we started with 2 narratives, terrorism versus flight, and ended with one branch of government using its power to legally shut another out of a homicide investigation. It really shows how quickly the facts on the ground can become secondary to the political strategy.
Which leaves us with a really critical final question for you, the learner, to think about. If the federal government can unilaterally cut off a state investigation into one of its own officers, making local prosecution impossible, what does that pattern mean for the balance of power in this country? What mechanisms are even left to ensure accountability when the trust between these layers of government completely collapses? And really, where does that leave the whole idea of local justice?